Ellen is completely unusable now, is something that people have been saying recently, and let's be honest, we've all had concerns about our favorite shark. Ellen was ZenlessZoneZero's first ever S-rank limited agent, and with her release, the first endgame content rotation favored her heavily. However, in recent patches, new content no longer buffs her nearly as much, and that begs the question of whether she has any value anymore. Don't worry though, today I'll be going over everything you need to know about Ellen in version 1.5, if her build or teams have changed, and most importantly, if she's worth pulling for. But without further ado guys, let's get into it. Since her introduction back in 1.0, Ellen's playstyle and gameplay loop has remained generally the same. Stack up ice charges on Ellen, build daze against the boss, stun the boss and swap to Ellen so she can use her chain attack, and then unload all her energy and ice charges so she can deal massive damage. This combo remaining relatively the same as to how it was in 1.0 can be seen as boring, especially if you compare it to other agents like Miyabi or Yanagi in later patches, but personally I find that a simple rotation can just be as rewarding since it doesn't require you to focus too hard on other factors around you, and you could focus on more creative plays at the same time. To illustrate this point, not everyone wants to track how many quivers are on the ground with Haramasa, and equally so, not everyone necessarily wants to track what stance you're in with Yanagi and just wants to press her EX special for big disorder damage. Now on the topic of other agents, a very serious topic to discuss regarding Ellen is her damage and how it compares against other agents. Before we get into this, however, I need to include a disclaimer about the following results I found. To be clear, certain agents have fights specifically designed with special buffs that boost their damage by an absurd amount, and so for transparency's sake, it should be known that comparisons between agents and the performance of certain characters can change based on the encounter and the buffs that they gained while they're in them. A perfect example of this is the recent state of Shiyu defense, where for several weeks critical nodes have had buffs like 25% increase to anomaly buildup rate alongside an increase to anomaly proficiency. All of this contributes of course towards anomaly performing much better, where attack agents certainly suffer. This also of course means that characters like Yanagi or Bernice will just perform much better than agents who don't care for anomaly as a whole. Now because of this, Ellen has definitely lost potential value when competing for faster clears or higher damage in these fights specifically, but that's not all. Something that is truly worrying when it comes to Ellen as of late is that even an M6 Okaku built for damage can sometimes contend with her currently, and let's face it, a free A rank character competing with a limited S rank character can be a bit disappointing even if they need Mindscapes to do so. Now despite this however, you should know that Ellen has still been able to consistently clear S rank Shiyu defenses, and in Deadly Assault she can still obtain at least 2, sometimes 3 stars when used, which in theory should be enough since of course you only need 6 stars total for the premium currency rewards that everyone is looking for. Now moving past her damage however, it's time we actually discuss her kit. If you're already familiar with how Ellen works, feel free to move to the next section, which I've included timestamped, but if you're curious about how Ellen works as a first time puller, here's everything you need to know. Ellen's unique resource is known as flash freeze charges. Ellen's kit revolves around this, and they add things like additional damage or increase certain skills multipliers. This makes them extremely important for Ellen's overall damage and are also part of the reason why Ellen does respectable damage even if she isn't hitting a stunned enemy or is about to unload all of her damage all at once. What's important to know about these charges however is the following. To start, they get consumed as Ellen performs her basic attacks or dash attack when not in her special dodge running state. You'll want to store at least 3 charges on Ellen before attacking so that every part of Ellen's 3-hit basic attack is enhanced with ice. To generate or obtain these charges, there are a few ways you can choose from, but I decided to list all of them for clarity's sake and in case you were curious. One flash freeze charge is given when the first part of Ellen's EX special attack, known as Tail Swipe, hits an enemy, but in addition to this, using the second EX special attack, known as Sharknami, will provide a charge as well. Now, while these two methods only give a single charge each, Ellen's dodge-related abilities as a whole grants her the most charges while also giving her a brand new mechanic unique to her specifically. Speaking of said unique mechanic, let's break that down quickly. If Ellen holds down or presses her dodge input button twice, she can enter the roaming state, which grants her increased speed and additional effects if she uses abilities while in said state. To give an example of the additional effects she gains, Ellen's dash attack when not in her special running state will, as mentioned earlier, consume a charge. But if you're actively in the roaming state, she instead generates 1 charge for performing a quick normal dash attack, or 3 total charges if you perform a held dash attack instead. Now, this might sound like a lot, but I promise once I explain the rest of her kit, all of this will make much more sense. Before we talk about actual damaging moves, let's talk about her core skill and additional ability. Her core skill is simple. Ellen gains 100% increased crit damage to 2 specific skills in her kit, and this is for her charge scissor strike, which is just a dash attack when in her running state that you have to continuously hold down, and her her Ice Enhanced basic attack that we mentioned earlier. The bonus damage gained via her core skill makes these two abilities very important, but from this we can see that a majority of damage comes from her basic attacks, which makes sense given the increased crit damage that they gain. Ellen's additional ability is another set of bonus stats given to her, but in order to access them, Ellen must first be paired with another ice agent or someone from Victoria Housekeeping. If this condition is met, Ellen's ice damage is increased by 3% for 10 seconds after dealing ice damage, but this can be stacked 10 times for a total of 30%. Moving to Ellen's actual damage skills, let's begin with her basic attack. If Ellen has no flash freeze charges, she performs a 3-part physical damage combo that is honestly low damage and not worth doing. However, if she does have a flash freeze charge, the 3-hit combo is then enhanced to deal ice damage, but it comes at the cost of 1 charge per hit. This is worth it, however, since the highest damage dealing hit in this combo is the 3rd and final hit of said ice enhanced sequence. Something worth mentioning here as well is the previously mentioned final ice hit can also be extended by repeatedly pressing or holding down the basic attack input button. This extends the attack from a few hits to a massive 2 times or even 3 times the total number of hits performed, and this of course contributes to a pretty significant increase in damage, so make sure to keep an eye out for this. Ellen's EX special, as mentioned earlier, has 2 forms, but to be clear, Ellen also has a non-energy using special attack. Fortunately, this isn't important at all and we'll be skipping over it. The first energy consuming EX special, however, is known as Tail Swipe, as we mentioned earlier, and this costs 40 energy to cast while dealing a decent amount of damage. Her second EX special is known as Sharknami, which also costs 40 energy, but this attack deals way more damage than Tail Swipe, but it does require you performing Tail Swipe first before you can then use Sharknami. This technically gets bypassed if you have access to Ellen's second Mindscape, but more on that later. Another important detail of Ellen's EX special attacks are that both allow you to immediately follow up these skills with the 3rd and hardest hitting move from her basic attack combo. This, in combination with the 1 Flash Frost charge that she's given just for casting her EX special, means that she can instantly deal a large amount of damage back to back, all while being synergized perfectly with each other and not needing to perform another dash attack in order to get enough charges to perform this attack. Now, avoiding the first 2 parts of her initial basic attack combo is also just amazing, as these first hits don't deal great damage, but now it's time we talk about Ellen's dodge related abilities. As we mentioned earlier, Ellen has a number of cool features that change the way that her dodge abilities work, and as we already discussed earlier, her dash attacks change and are affected by the roaming state. Now, because of this, let me instead shift focus into when these skills are used and some special traits that they have. Although using dash attacks is the best way for Ellen to gain ice charges, she doesn't perform them for damage the same way that you would use her EX special or ultimate. Instead, Ellen's dash attacks are best used prior to stunning a boss in order to generate and store ice charges before activating Ellen's chain attack and unloading all of her damage. Additionally, a useful feature attached to Ellen's charged dash attack is that it grants her increased anti-interrupt alongside a 40% reduction in damage taken. This means her dash attack can also be helpful in avoiding knockback related moves from the enemy, but be careful as content like Deadly Assault or the Battle Tower have recently introduced enemies that deal insane amounts of damage and can sometimes even one-shot your agents. Another detail in regards to Ellen's dodge related abilities is the fact that her dodge counter feels slightly awkward to use. This is because Ellen will have to decide between gaining ice charges alongside using the anti-interrupt from her charged dash attack or using her dodge counter to avoid damage entirely. This of course is dependent on the situation, whether you have Caesar on your team or various other team factors, but it's worth mentioning since this isn't a character whose dodge counter is much better than any of her other dodge abilities that she has access to. Ellen's assists are pretty standard and can be used to generate days, but interestingly, if you perform a quick assist with Ellen, she gains a quick charge effect which shortens the animation of her charged dash attack. Ellen also has the ability to extend the total number of hits she deals at the end of an assist follow-up, which is similar to what she can do with the final hit of her basic attack. Ellen's chain attack is a decent damage dealing skill, but as it only deals damage, has no other special effects, and honestly kind of has a long animation, it's worth performing when possible, but isn't very noteworthy. What is worth knowing, however, is that Ellen's chain attack doesn't hit nearly as many enemies as other chain attacks do without grouping, and this is best illustrated if you compare someone like Jane Doe or Miyabi's chain attacks to Ellen's, which of course was developed on release. Of course, this can be bypassed by grouping enemies together or with proper preparations, but it just requires more effort. Ellen's ultimate is pretty similar to her chain attack as well in the sense that it simply deals damage, but because of that, that's about all that this skill has to offer. It does still look cool though. With the kit explanation out of the way, now would be a good time to talk about skill priority. And unfortunately, I have bad news for those of you who have been tirelessly farming for character materials. Ellen is an agent who basically wants every skill upgraded to max, and given her role as a DPS, this does make sense. Now, this does also mean that she needs to upgrade her chain, basic, EX special, and even dodge related abilities to showcase her damage, and that can can kind of be a concern in terms of investment. That aside, I would still prioritize upgrading her core passive first, since the added damage and base stats she gains is most important. Now, additionally, with the changes to Notorious Hunt now making it quicker to farm, and the restrictions of weekly materials being removed, upgrading your core passive post 1.0 has never been easier or more valuable. All this aside, it is still worth mentioning that the final thing I would prioritize is definitely her assists, though this doesn't mean that they are worthless, it just means that they're helpful for days of minor damage, but not nearly as impactful as some of her other abilities. In terms of Ellen's combos, I have two that I found to be helpful in various settings, and the first is for when Ellen needs to deal AoE damage, fight multiple enemies, or clear something like the first wave of a Shiyu defense. To begin this combo, we'll need the help of a Dazer or someone who can apply stun to enemies quickly. Once we have a stunner, the combo looks like the following: apply buffs to the team, group enemies together with the team's Dazer, begin the chain attack, and immediately end the chain with Ellen. Truthfully, this alone should be more than enough to kill most non-boss enemies, especially if they're grouped together, but if it's not, using Ellen's EX special attack and finishing off an enemy with her ice basic attack afterward should still be enough. Side note, if even more damage is needed, using a few additional charged dash attacks prior to starting the chain attack will then provide higher overall damage, since you'll be gaining additional ice charges and allowing Ellen to group enemies together at the same time. That being said though, in most cases this will not really be that necessary. The second combo will look similar to the first, however it's more designed for bosses in Deadly Assault, the final wave of a Shiyu defense encounter, or for singular targets in general. To start, we'll once again require the help of a stunner and support, but prior to stunning and beginning a chain attack against the boss, we'll need to do the following. Ellen will need to perform at least 2 charged dash attack for max ice charges, as she will require as much damage as possible later. Then, if paired with a character like Nicole or Rina, applying buffs or debuffs just before entering into the chain attack is very important, so that they will affect the entirety of Ellen's chain attack. But once Ellen's chain attack is completed, her combo is as follows: EX special into performing the third hit of her basic attack, repeat this again with another EX special into a third hit of her basic attack. By this point, you should also presumably have her ultimate available, and with this you should make sure to use it after an EX special has already been cast, so that you can get the most value out of it. To end the combo, however, a third and final EX special alongside a third hit of her basic attack will round things out, and any remaining ice charges can be consumed with basic attacks as the end of the stun window arrives. I do also have one additional optimization that you can make that is especially relevant as of 1.5, and this is in regards to her dash attack. Because of the long animation that Ellen's charged dash attack locks her into, you can actually swap to another character to perform other actions while this is happening. That means that you can swap to someone like Rina to reapply her pen ratio buff, Lighter to instantly begin stunning with his combo. The possibilities are truly endless. This can save time when performed consistently over the course of a fight, but ultimately the effect this will have on your clear times will depend mostly on your team composition and setup. Since 1.0, a number of new W engines have been added to the game. Mercado Desire and Gilded Blossom, for instance, are 2 new additions that you might have seen pop up as potential options for attack agents. Now, though both of these appear to be similar with adding attacks through their passives, it should be noted that Mercado outperforms Gilded and even matches or performs better than Starlight Engine, which of course is the best free-to-play attack W engine. This is mostly due to Mercado's attack percent increase being decently easy to activate, and also because, well, Gilded Blossom's passive is less valuable to Ellen's damage profile overall. Now, if we look closer at Mercado versus Gilded, we can see that the difference in performance is mostly due to Mercado's attack percent increase being decently easy to activate, and also because Gilded Blossom's passive is definitely less valuable to Ellen's damage profile overall. Where Mercado Desire and Starlight Engine both provide unconditional damage increases to attack percent, part of Gilded Blossom's value is tied specifically to increasing special attack damage. And as we've seen through Ellen's damage share, basic attack and ultimate damage are equal or much bigger shares than special attacks in this case, which is where the discrepancy in damage and performance comes from. Notably though, Ellen's signature W engine is still her best choice by a wide margin, with Brimstone still coming in second, and let's just be honest here guys, the added ice damage and crit rate from Deep Sea Visitor is simply too good to pass up. Beyond anything else though, this W engine being an S rank does also mean that it has a better attack base compared to other A rank options, which is why it ranks so highly. Now there is ultimately good and bad news to interpret from this though, but enough stalling, let's just break it down. The good news regarding Ellen's W engine is that should you choose to pull for it, you'll definitely see a drastic increase in damage from Ellen. Early 1.0 calculations showed something like a 15 to 25% DPS increase if you had this initially, and it's only maintained or grown since then. The other piece of good news is that, well, even if you don't have Ellen's signature W engine, Mercado Desire and Starlight Engine are both free-to-play options that have easy conditions to activate for free stats. The bad news, however, is that Ellen's performance, especially post 1.0, is definitely lacking if you don't have have her signature. This doesn't mean that you won't be able to clear endgame content like Shiyu or Deadly Assault, especially if you've invested a lot into your Ellen, or that you'll necessarily regret passing over her W engine, but it does mean that you'll need it if you want the highest, easiest, and most competitive damage performance, especially in this landscape of DPS and damage dealing agents. My recommendation with this, especially since there have been so many teased characters upcoming, is that her W engine is something that you can pass over. Personally, I would just use something like Mercado Desire, especially since I was never someone that really liked Starlight Engine, but of course, if you have other upgraded W engines instead, like Starlight Engine, and you don't have Mercado Desire leveled, I would definitely use the one that you have invested in already, since, well, it's free stats, and having to spend more resources to upgrade to something like this is not really worth it. Now, despite all this, I would still like to give the warning that Ellen will need to be played near perfectly if you really want to clear without her signature, so keep this in mind when you're choosing whether or not to pull for her W engine. Moving to Ellen's build, not much has really changed since 1.0. Despite the new ice-related set that's been released, Branch and Blade Song really doesn't do much for Ellen since she lacks the anomaly mastery to reach the passive effect without giving up attack percent in exchange for it. In terms of 2P set effects, Branch and Blade alongside Astral Voice can also now be used for Ellen, but as we've seen since 1.0, the 2P set effect of disc drives have much lower impact than we initially believed. Because of this, I've actually found and chose a new farming method that I prefer when it comes to routine cleanup, and more specifically what I mean is choosing a stage with 2 versatile disc drives and then using the music store to reroll and try to find any usable pieces for other disc drive sets that I want. With this though, my personal recommendation for Ellen's disc drive set is still 4-piece Woodpecker, as the attack percent and easy to activate condition makes this perform very well, but in addition to this, anything including Hormone Punk, Polar Metal, Puffer Electro, or even Branch and Blade Song will be fine as a 2-piece set effect. For main stats, Ellen is looking for the following. On her 4th slot, crit rate or crit damage will be your choice depending on your roles, W engine, and team composition, and this choice mostly comes down to whether your W engine has something like crit rate as its main stat, or if it has attack percent instead. Keep in mind that Ellen does also gain an insane amount of crit rate with her signature as well if you choose to pull for it, so plan accordingly. For her 5th slot, ice damage and attack percent are still closely competitive to each other, but it is worth noting that if you use Rena, swapping this to pen ratio is very important if you want Ellen's performance to still be decent. For the 6th slot, this should be no surprise, but attack percent will be your best choice, and there's nothing else that you can replace with in this slot, which means that you choose here will be highly influenced by which stat you have an excess of, but as always, if you have better rolls on one disk drive or another, feel free to use that instead. As a final note, one of the most important things to remember as well is trying to maintain a reasonable balance of crit rate to crit damage while you're doing all this, just so that you aren't left with too little crit or too much damage without having a proper ratio or stat line that actually makes sense. My recommendation then is the following: 4th slot crit damage, 5th slot ice damage, and 6th slot attack percent, and included here will also be a potential final stat line, and with the state of 1.5, your goal stat line will look like 3100 attack, 75 crit rate, and 150 crit damage. After much playtesting and research, Ellen's Mindscapes have slightly better value than we initially thought. Her first Mindscape provides additional crit rate for the number of flash freeze charges that Ellen consumes, but something also worth considering is that her charge dash attack now provides more charges per use. While this might not seem super impactful during a stun window, it does mean that Ellen out of stun does have an easier time reaching max charges prior to beginning her damage combo, and with this it also means that Ellen requires half the number of dash attacks to reach max cap, which then consequently results in her having more time to use ice charges even when not in her stun combo for additional damage. Ellen's second Mindscape is a decent jump in damage, with it giving her crit damage when using an EX special attack, but more importantly, this Mindscape also allows her to follow up her 3rd hit of her basic attack with the higher damage dealing Shark Nami instead of her tail swipe. This is nice again as it deals more damage, but also having access to a 3rd hit in any capacity is very valuable for Ellen. Her 4th Mindscape is decent for overall flash freeze charges and energy generation, but honestly, as this is a Mindscape that influences resources and energy, it's pretty difficult to assess exactly how valuable this is, since different scenarios, bosses, and encounters will show Ellen overcap on certain stats or maybe find better value in this, but it's difficult to actually put an accurate reading on how valuable this Mindscape is. The 6th and final Mindscape for Ellen is an absurd damage increase as it adds pen ratio and buffs to her dash attack, but overall this is a 6th level Mindscape and it's to be expected that it would increase her damage by a decent amount. Ellen's teams as of 1.5 have changed with the introduction of agents like Lighter and Astra Yao, but before I talk about damage performance and how well each team scored in terms of clear speed and damage, it's important to note that using any team listed here will yield good results. With this out of the way, let's begin. Ellen's best team in 1.0 was Ellen, Lyco, and Sokaku, but since then, new supports have been released, better dazers have been introduced, and more importantly, our understanding of endgame content in ZenlessZoneZero has has been changed immensely. While Ellen, Lycone, Sokaku was one of the only teams at launch that felt fully functional and cohesive, this is no longer the case. To see exactly how this team has aged, however, I tested multiple teams and landed on 4 teams to compare their performances against each other. Ellen, Lighter, Astra, and Ellen, Lycone, Sokaku were the best performing or most noteworthy teams that I wanted to compare for the sake of this test. Let's start this breakdown with Ellen, Lycone, Sokaku, as this was the best team formerly. In version 1.5, this team still has plenty of synergy with Ice Shred, Ice damage buffs, and a perfect DPS to utilize every damage boost, but truthfully, even though this team doesn't compete against the newest insane Miyabi teams or even the anomaly bursting Yanagi Bernice compositions, Ellen still has a fighting shot in clear as well, assuming that you use this team composition. From time spent fighting with and using this team, one of the major noticeable weaknesses, however, is just how long you'll spend with Lycone on screen. This is the case for most stages though, as getting to the sun window with Ellen is where she shines best, but even if you decide to keep Lycone off for most of the fights, the performance in this case is still pretty similar. In addition to this, Sokaku does feel somewhat clunky to use, as maintaining her vortex stacks and working around her chain attack can be confusing at times, but with the decibel changes in 1.4, Sokaku has actually become much easier to manage, as she now has her ultimate to buff the team and also provides noteworthy damage to the squad. Overall, the team's game plan is very standard though. Stun the enemy with Lycone, provide buffs with Sokaku, and unleash all damage with Ellen once the enemy is dazed. Before we move to the next team, it's worth mentioning that this team was the baseline for which I compared the rest of the teams and their performances, so keep this in mind as you hear the rest of the results. Ellen, Lighter, Astra is one of the most talked about team compositions floating around right now, and I understand why. Astra Yao was recently released, and she has insane team-wide buffs like damage percent and crit damage buffs alongside a massive attack increase. Lighter, on the other hand, buffs the damage of ice units alongside increasing stun duration, and these two things help with Ellen's combos a lot. Now, despite losing Ellen's additional ability by running this team, you'll actually be interested to know that she performs better in this setup than the Lycone Sokaku best in slot team. However, it should also be said that this team's performance improves even more assuming that you fight against a fire weak enemy. Now, of course, that's conditional and not always present, so we'll ignore that for now, but the team itself revolves around using the 2-man of Ellen and Lighter to constantly daze and deal damage on the field until an enemy is stunned and Ellen can begin her damage combo while Astra buffs from behind the scenes. At this point, you might have come to the conclusion that, well, with this, Ellen, Lighter, Astra has got to be the new best team for Ellen since it's got better results than with Ellen, Lycone, Sokaku, and well, Astra and Lighter are both limited characters that provide amazing buffs, but I'm shocked to say we actually have a higher performing team with Ellen, Lycone, Astra. I have to say though, in regards to this team, having Lycone on an Astra team feels a bit uncomfortable at first, since Astra's perfect assist prompt will ask that you constantly swap him onto field, but once you shake this awkwardness aside, this team deals great damage. To be clear, this team does end up beating others in damage and clear speed, and truthfully, any team with Astra Yao just feels easier to play as you're really only playing a 2-person team composition as opposed to 3. Now, despite the difference in feel and comfort, just in terms of raw stats, buffs, and damage, the performance of this team makes sense. This team with Astra Yao and Ellen's additional ability active will do amazingly and outperform any other team. Right? Well, actually no, because the highest damage and quickest clear speed among all times tested is actually Ellen, Lighter, Sokaku. This surprised me the most because all of the buffing from Astra Yao really made it sound like Astra would outperform any of her peers, but both in terms of clear speed and calculatable damage, this beat the Lycone Sokaku team by nearly 10%. This was the largest gap or difference of any team that was tested. Now, in terms of how the team worked, it's not that much different than Ellen, Lighter, Astra. However, this time around, Sokaku's vortex stacks need to be managed properly and time with Lighter's damage debuffs so that Ellen can blow up any enemy present, but aside from this is honestly a pretty simple team to play. Now, as we end this section of results, I must once again re-emphasize that all these teams felt decent and showcased good results when tested properly. In addition to this, there were certainly moments where one team pulled ahead of the other because of element weaknesses, enemy behaviors, etc. So regardless if you choose to use one team or another, keep in mind that these are all going to perform very well, especially for Ellen as of 1.5. And now we've arrived at the most important question of all. Is Ellen worth pulling for in version 1.5 or in 2025? And the answer is, well, not really. Ellen did her job amazingly on release as the premier DPS that could clear any content with ease, but once endgame content had its buffs and overall tuning to favor other agents like Jane or the entire Anomaly cast, attack agents as a whole lost a lot of value. Even though recent Deadly Assaults have also had ice weaknesses on bosses and even some daze plus attack agent focused buffs, buffs, these boosts were unfortunately nowhere near as influential as the stats, damage multipliers, and general buffs that were given to anomaly agents as of late. Now, before the Ellen lovers in the comment section rise up and raise their pitchforks, I do want to remind you all that Ellen can still clear all current relevant content that gives premium currency. This means that if you do pull for Ellen, it doesn't mean that she'll struggle or fail to clear content even as a 1.0 DPS. Now, while this is true, it doesn't mean that she'll actually compete at the highest level with characters like Miyabi or Yanagi. Now, because of all this, I would be lying if I recommended you all to pull for her, and that's why I specifically would not recommend pulling her unless if you really like her. Now, of course, with all this information, you could do with this what you will. I'm not a financial advisor, and to be clear, you can always make your own researched opinion on whether or not you should pull for a character like her. This is just what I found, experimented with, and tested. Thanks again for watching though today, guys. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to like, comment, turn on the notification bell, and subscribe. If you want to check out the rest of my content, or if you have any suggestions for what I should make next, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section down below. If you want to find other ZenlessZoneZero related content, feel free to check out the rest of my socials or my other videos. And thanks again for watching. Hope you have a lovely day, a lovely afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are and whenever you're watching this. But thanks again for watching, everyone. I'll see you on the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.